world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Wednesday, January 21st, as you are listening to this. Now, I am recording it Tuesday night, just after getting off a TikTok live with Mike, the Rational Boomer. A lot of you know me from the Rational Boomer podcast, and whenever Mike goes live, I end up jumping in on the panel. Now, I had thought about doing my own live, just like I did yesterday as part of the podcast, and opted instead to be on Mike's live. That way, because we have a very similar following base, so that way I didn't end up pulling people away from hearing the message. And because he gets a bigger following, I figured better to get the information out to more people that way. But we've got a lot to talk about. There's always a lot to talk about. Now, yesterday, the 20th, as you are listening to this, was the 1 year anniversary of Donald Trump becoming president. And what has he accomplished in that 1 year? Well, fuck all. He hasn't gotten anything accomplished, nothing of substance, nothing of value. The only real accomplishments for this administration have been the passing of the one big bullshit bill that cuts a ton of money to food stamps and to Medicaid and hurts a bunch of people while giving tax cuts at the same time to wealthy people and billionaires and corporations. And in that one big beautiful bill, there has been a lot of other issues that, they popped up, right? And it was all things that this administration did to dupe people. For example, the no tax on overtime. We find out that they were saying, well, there's going to be no taxes on overtime. And that sounds great. And we said at the time, well, there's going to be a limit and it's not going to be unlimited. And you're going to have your taxes taken out of your check when you work the overtime, but you're not going to you'll go get it back at the end. And everyone kept saying, well, no, you're wrong, you're wrong. It'll save you a whole bunch of money up front. That's what all the Republicans said. That's what all the Trumplefucks said. To use Mike's term. But the Trumplefucks all said, the MAGAs, they all said, oh, it's going to be great. No tax on overtime. It's going to put money in my pocket. And then we were right. You had to pay the taxes on it up front. Well, now people are starting to file and look over and deal with their taxes. Okay. And now that they are looking at their taxes, what are they finding out? Well, they're finding out that it's not even no tax on overtime, because when you work overtime, everybody assumes that overtime is, time and a half, and it is. However, the way the IRS is looking at it is that for every hour of overtime you work, they are only viewing the no tax on the overtime as the extra half for time and a half. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to use stupid simple math, okay? If you worked 10 hours of overtime and you were paid $10 an hour, you would have earned $150 in those 10 hours. But it's not tax free on all 150. It's only going to be tax free on $50 worth of that 150, because that is the half of time and a half. That is what they are considering actual overtime. So it's not even that good. It's, again, they gave us a pittance, and they gave us, something small, but it was something that a big group of people were chomping at the bit going, well, this is great. There's going to be no tax on overtime. And Donald Trump ran on no tax on overtime. It was one of the things that got him elected because a big group of people in this country thought it was going to be all gravy and it was going to be good. And we said at the time, and I know I was talking about it, saying I didn't think it was even going to happen, that he was just promising things that weren't going to be true. Well, come to find out, much like a lot of things with Donald Trump, it's not true. I mean, it's a partial truth, enough that you could claim that it is true realistically, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. Okay. Same thing with no tax on tips. Now, one of the things that came out was it was only on cash tips. Now, we haven't heard this happening yet, but what I think they're going to be doing with that is they're looking for the people who are suddenly now claiming way more in cash tips than they ever did before on their taxes. The ones who, you know, didn't actually claim all their tips to begin with when they were cash and not card, because they were able to say, well, yeah, I was making enough, I didn't need to claim it for one reason or another. And then suddenly, um, everything was okay. Like they said, well, I made $30,000 last year as a waitress, but they didn't actually register their cash tips. That was only in tips ran through a card or whatever. And now this year, because there's no tax on tips, suddenly working the same job, about the same number of hours, suddenly they're claiming 50, $60,000 because of the no tax. They're probably going to get audited. And that's a problem. Now, I know MAGAs are going to come out and say, well, you should just pay your taxes and claim all your tips. But I guarantee you, most people who are working for cash don't do that. They only claim enough to bring them up to the federal minimum wage, which is still 7.25. And this no tax on tips thing it wasn't anything about trying to actually help people. This was all a way to get people to report the other actual income that they had. And, you know, it's going to come back and bite us, or those people that are tipped anyway. It's going to bite them. What else did Donald Trump accomplish? Well, the only other major piece of legislation that they passed was the Epstein File Release Act, the Epstein File Transparency Act. And guess what? We are over a month overdue for all of the files being released. And this administration doesn't seem to care that they're over a month behind. In fact, over the weekend, I talked about it. They ended up not filing or filing something with the DOJ saying, and in their court case, the DOJ filed that no court has the jurisdiction to look over and tell them that they have to release the files. Basically, that if the courts want the authority to look over the Epstein files and tell the DOJ to release them, that Congress must pass an additional law to do that. And that's blatantly not true. I mean, courts have the power of judicial review. They have had it since almost the beginning of this country. And that's the whole point, right? We don't have it written into every single law that um, courts can hold you punishable. Now, there may be punishments written into laws for if you violate this or that or whatever, like, oh, hey, you get caught on not wearing a seatbelt, you're going to get a $75 fine or whatever that number is now. You know, and the argument could be made about seatbelt laws, and that's not what I'm here to argue on. Because I know some people, like a former coworker of mine, would come out and say, "Well, you should be allowed to not wear a seatbelt because if you want to put your life in jeopardy, who cares?" But that's not my point. My point is written into the seatbelt law, for example, there is a fine. Okay, you get caught without a seatbelt, you pay the fine. And they can say, "Well, you go to court because you got given a fine." But they don't write it into every law that the court can look over and force the police department, for example, to issue that fine. I mean, there's discretion there or whatever. I know it's not exactly the same thing. But point is, the DOJ was grasping, trying to just say the courts did not have the authority to tell the DOJ to release this. Now, what are they hoping to accomplish? Well, I guarantee you, the judge, when they look at this, is going to say, "Well, that's bullshit. Of course, we have the right to overlook it and make a determination." Um, so why are they doing it? Well, they're hoping to get in front of maybe an appeals court and get in front of the right set of appellate judges that would agree with them. And if they don't agree and that doesn't work, they would move on to the Supreme Court. And they would hope that the Supreme Court would say, yeah, you're right. We don't have to release them because they didn't word the law right or something. This is a last ditch effort. But even this corrupt Supreme Court, who's issued some pretty awful rulings, would not be willing to wade in to try to say that the Supreme Court can't decide, what and can't get involved in these matters. I mean, the ability of judicial review goes back almost to the founding of our country, to the initial writing of the Constitution. Now, when we are looking at that, you have to go back to the 1800s, early 1800s. I think it's somewhere between 1800 and 1804 during the uh, Jefferson administration. There's a Supreme Court case, Marbury v. Madison. Now, Mr. Marbury was appointed to be a judge by the Federalist John Adams. And at the time, there were these commissions, which was basically it was a medallion or it was a piece of paper, something. It was an official something that said that you were now a judge. And they pushed through so many judges through the U.S. Supreme Court or through the Senate, I mean, that they didn't get all of these commissions out to everybody that needed to get one. And basically, Mr. Marbury sued then Secretary of State James Madison and said, "Well, I'm due this commission, so you better issue it to me." Well, trying to shrink this down, long story short, the Supreme Court, when they looked at it, said, "Yeah, you are due the commission." However, as they dug into it, they said, "Actually, the law that says you need this official document is unconstitutional." And that is what set up the precedent for judicial review, where they said from then on that the courts have the power to review laws and they can toss laws out and say that this is not constitutional. So, not even this Supreme Court would be willing to overturn that precedent, because if they tried to say, well, we can't uh, order and compel you to follow a law or we can't interpret a law, that would be basically saying that they have no teeth, that there is nothing they can do. And they're not going to do that to themselves. So, what else did this administration get done in 1 year? Nothing. They've delayed releasing the Epstein files and they passed a bullshit tax cut. Oh, and they did have the longest government shutdown in history, all while allowing the Affordable Care Act subsidies to expire and causing people's health care to explode as far as the cost. And then you have a president who is doing all sorts of things where we question his health and his sanity on a daily basis. Now, yesterday, Donald Trump does this press conference, and it's like a 2-hour press event. And he was all over the place. He was doing his typical trying to weave like 28 points together, and none of them made a lot of sense. He had a stack of papers and he was talking about all the things they accomplished. And some of them he was just making stuff up, claiming once again that he ended like 9 wars, 8 or 9 wars, something like that, claiming that there was zero inflation. Inflation's actually going back up. And he said, well, inflation was, at a 20-year high or so, a high point whenever Biden left office, but it wasn't. Biden had actually got it from like 9%, which is what he inherited. Um, and he did inherit it because the reason inflation went high was because of all of the failed policies of the Trump administration the first time around and the mishandling of COVID. That is the only reason inflation spiked the way it did. But he wants to blame Joe Biden for that. So he said that inflation's down and it's basically zero. Well, you don't want to have zero inflation because that means your economy's not growing. And if you have negative inflation, or it is, that means you are heading toward a depression or a recession, usually a depression at that point. And that you don't want that either. If prices and stuff are going down and things are deflating, I mean, it's a good thing for consumers in a way because you can spend less money and buy more. But ultimately, if it stays down for too long, it is a very bad economic sign, and it can lead to tons of economic uncertainty, and it could lead to things like what happened with in 1929, 1930 with the stock market crash and the beginnings of the Great Depression. But he went on and he was talking about some of the things that they've done. And for like 10 minutes, all he did was hold up pictures of people that had very simple descriptions of the crimes that they had committed. And he would just hold up an image and then say, caught this one, caught this one, caught this one. Oh, this was a bad one. And, if your grandfather was acting the way he was at a family dinner or something, and I realize it's a big difference between family dinner and a press conference. But if he was just going off like Donald Trump was, you'd be considering a nursing home, maybe a memory care unit. And that's where Donald Trump is at this point. That's where he should be, is a memory care unit. Now, he went on in this big press event. And at one point, he stopped and he was talking about how if the tariffs don't, or if the tariffs are overturned by the United States Supreme Court, that China would be able to just take over and it wouldn't be able to hold anything against China. And that he actually kind of looked down as he said it. He goes, well, they'd be coming for your carpet. What? I think that I really believe, if you listen to the clip, that he lost his place in his train of thought. He looked down, he saw the carpet, and that was the first thing that came to mind. So that's what he went with, and he just kept on talking. It was like 2 hours of him rambling, and he never really got to the point. He was low energy. He did not look like his normal, vibrant self, and this is how they chose to showcase um, everything that happened with his first year of his first or second administration. We are 25% of the way through this administration, and this was their effort to showcase everything. Now, the other part of this press conference, I mean, there was so much to it. It was like 2 hours. And the whole thing, it was nothing but a brag for Donald Trump. It's what he does. He didn't actually accomplish anything during his first year. It could have been worse than what we actually got. What we got was pretty bad. And I didn't expect it to be this bad. I really thought Congress would step up, and even the corrupt Republicans that we currently have would say enough is enough and prevent things from getting too bad and too out of hand. But they didn't. But all he was doing was bragging about his supposed victories. And that's typical Donald Trump, typical narcissist, is that he was out here telling everybody how great he was doing. And he was talking about their victories with ICE. And, he was talking about how, oh, it was such a good thing to have uh, the National Guard in Washington, D.C., and how much safer Washington, D.C. is now because of him, where you can now walk down the street in the nation's capital. And oh, it was a good thing to have our National Guard out doing gardening and things like that. Really, that was a good thing. You have trained soldiers, which the National Guard are soldiers. They're just citizens first, But you have trained soldiers out just wandering the streets, doing yard cleanup, and that's a good thing. You want to send the military into American cities, and you were trying to use them to intimidate your own people, and you think that's a positive thing. I made the comparison over on TikTok. He had that stack of paperwork with him. And at one point, it was very weird. He had a binder or something, and he tried to open the binder, and it almost pinched his finger. And he talked about how he wouldn't complain about the pain, um, because he was just that tough or something. While his finger would be laying there and he'd be bleeding or something. It was bizarre. But I was talking about these papers, and I made the comparison to his father, Fred Trump. And from what the reporting has been about his father, Fred Trump, as at the end of his life, he was in similar shape to Donald Trump, battling dementia, didn't know where he was, but couldn't convince him to go. Like they couldn't put him in a home. They couldn't do anything with him. And he'd always been used to being the boss. So they basically paid somebody to print up bogus and bullshit stories and give him paperwork to sign and busy work. And they gave him a fake office and basically had him show up, put in an 8-hour day at the office, even though he wasn't in charge and running things anymore, where he could shuffle papers, file paperwork, look over figures and stuff. And just make things look like he's doing something. We could have solved a lot of problems if the Republicans would have just done that to Donald Trump. Put in a couple of fake press cameras, maybe convince somebody around him to install an Oval Office into Mar-a-Lago or one of his other golf clubs, and just take him in there every single day and shuffle papers around, have people come in, ask him questions about things, let him play president. And I think in the end, it would have done the Republican Party much uh, better than what they currently got. I think the Republicans are going to be struggling for how to deal with Donald Trump and his legacy. And I think they're at the brink of losing the voting base for a generation or more. Now, Donald Trump is, he was celebrating, okay? But there was nothing to celebrate when it came to his first year. Things are pretty bad, but can we get out of it? Yes. Um, people are out protesting. That's one way to show how much we dislike what's going on and to show that they're on the wrong side of history. And that also puts pressure on the Republicans in Congress to step up and do the right thing and to get rid of Donald Trump. And I think ultimately they are going to be put into a position where they have to make that choice. Do they stand with Donald Trump, or do they go their own way, do their own thing, sink or swim? And I think that's what they're going to do. Now, I talked about it the last couple of days. We heard from Representative Don Bacon out of uh, Omaha that said they have the votes to impeach and remove Donald Trump, which tells me the House is talking to the Senate and that they've at least got a rough count of the number of votes they have in the Senate. And they think that they have the number of votes if they bring up articles of impeachment against Donald Trump, that they would not only pass the House and pass the Senate. I was talking about it in the TikTok live last night and in, I think it was on Monday's podcast. I think that when it happens, it is going to happen quick, fast, and in a hurry. You're not going to see a slow, formal impeachment inquiry that's going to take weeks to get done. When they decided to make the move against Donald Trump, this is just my prediction right now, the way I think things are going to go, because they're afraid of Donald Trump burning the Republican Party down, along the way, despite the fact that that's going to happen anyway. if unless they get lucky and the Big Mac actually takes him out, or maybe something else, that they are going to have to move on him fast, or he's going to burn the institution down as he goes. Now, how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to have to. What I think they're going to do is, like, one day, Dan Bacon's going to come up and he's going to say, "Okay, I want to introduce a bill. I've got the signatures for a discharge petition. We need to vote on this right now to impeach Donald Trump." And Mike Johnson's going to try to table it or whatever. And there's not going to be the votes to table it. And once the actual voting starts, I think it's going to turn into a dog pile, realistically. What I think is going to happen is you're going to have the Republicans go one by one saying no until they cross the 218 threshold. And then, because most of the time with votes like this, you're allowed to go back and change your vote. You are going to see a lot of Republicans flip their vote to yes. And suddenly it is going to steamroll the House of Representatives. I really believe that is what's going to happen once they know they have the votes, because I do not expect them to bring up articles of impeachment against Donald Trump unless they know for a fact, at 100% fact, that they can end up removing him successfully, that they would even attempt it. Now, then it'll go to the Senate, right? And then the Senate would hold trial. And I talked about it yesterday again on the live. I think that what they would do is that this trial would happen quick and fast, and it would be surprisingly quick. They may even have John Roberts, there, because it is going to be overseen by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That they would have John Roberts there in minutes. Like, it would be something where ducks are going to be in a row. You're not going to have we passed it in the House. We have to ceremonially walk it over to the Senate. And we're going to do that in 3 days or something. No, it's going to be, okay, it's passed and it is sent to the Senate in a hurry. Like, they are going to be doing this extremely fast, so fast that Donald Trump is not going to be able to react. Well, he will, but not nearly as well as what he could do if they gave him multiple days. And then once it is passed and he is on trial, like, sure, his team is going to be able to, put up a defense. Here's the thing. I expect the trial, when it happens, again, this is assuming Republicans start it, that it is over and done with in a day or two. It's not going to be drawn out. You're not going to have weeks. You are going to have it moving very, very quickly, and then he'll be gone. Now, somebody asked in the live last night what'll happen, or I guess it was Monday night in the live I did, yesterday's podcast. Well, would they need the military to remove Trump? No. Once the impeachment is over and they have voted him out and they have passed sentence, which the only two sentences you can get from an impeachment is removal from office, and if removed, they can impose a lifetime ban from ever holding public office again. Those are the only two things you can get for as punishment for an impeachment. And when they do that, wherever J.D. Vance is, he will put his hand on a Bible, more than likely, raise his right hand, and he will take the oath of office and he will become president. Now, Don Bacon said that they have the votes to do it if Donald Trump invades Greenland. That's kind of where this all is stemming from. Now, there's so many other things that should be a bridge too far for this administration, for the Republicans in general, that they should say, okay, can't support that, we can't support that, we can't support that. We've got to make a move. We've got to do something, right? And they haven't yet. So when does it become too much? Well, so far Greenland, but I think that means since they have come up with Greenland as their bridge too far, that means they're having other conversations and they're asking, okay, when is it, what about ice? When does this become, should we take it now? Should we wait? Should we, and they're measuring when they have the votes in each situation. I guarantee you those are happening behind the scenes. Don Bacon basically confirmed that. Well, with Donald Trump and ICE and Greenland, the fact that ICE is running rogue, doing whatever they want to do, should have been enough. It's not. Now there is talk about getting rid of Kristi Noem. Okay. And without a doubt, she has to go. But here's the thing: if they remove Donald Trump, I think she'll be gone anyway. I think when Donald Trump is finally gone, JD Vance becomes president, regardless of how that happens, whether it's the Big Mac, whether it's the 25th Amendment, because we know his health is failing. Just watch that 2 hour press conference and look at how he is talking and acting. He's not doing well, and they're not going to be able to keep propping him up for 3 more years. But when Donald Trump is gone, JD Vance, I believe, is going to clean house. He's going to be given very strict marching orders from Republican establishment in order to fix things so they even have a fighting chance going into the either the midterms, depending on if they do it ahead of the midterms, or into the general in 2028. And this is going to mean getting rid of Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Linda McMahon. And these people are going to be asked for their resignation, more than likely. He may fire them if they don't resign. And he's going to do Congress's job for them by not forcing them to impeach every single one of them. That's what I think is going to happen there. And then he's going to be able to get more qualified cabinet members around him. Does that mean he's going to have a more successful term than Donald Trump? Probably not. But they're going to be able to try to make things better. And then, of course, J.D. Vance would end up being able to pick his own VP. Congress would have to approve it. Mike Johnson would not automatically become VP. That is not how that works. And while we are talking about impeachment of Donald Trump, is it Article 4, Section 2, Article 2, Section 4? I get them backward. One of the two talks about impeachment of the president, the vice president, and other appointed members, other executive members of the executive branch, talking about how they can be impeached and removed for high crimes and misdemeanors and treason. Well, one of the things with that, it is not a catch-all, right? A lot of people keep saying, and they are wrong, that if they were to impeach Donald Trump for high crimes, for treason or something like that, or not upholding his oath of office, that the entire administration would be gone. And that's not how that works, not in the slightest. They would have to impeach and charge each one individually, and I just don't see that happening. Now, what would more than likely happen is they would just get rid of Donald Trump. JD Vance would appoint his own VP. He'd ask for resignations from the cabinet, and then they'd move on. Well, that's what I think is going to happen. They're not going to get there. We are going to be lucky if they get one of them impeached, let alone all of them. Even though Kristi Noem and some of the others do need to go, it is just not going to be feasible to impeach and remove everybody. It just won't be. Okay. Now, as far as Greenland goes, there's a lot going on with Greenland. First of all, Greenland's prime minister, I think they've got a prime minister, has basically told their citizens to prepare for an invasion from the United States. Said they don't think it's going to happen, but be prepared anyway. This comes on the heels of other European countries sending defensive forces to Greenland to reinforce it. And we already have, I believe, a base on Greenland, so it wouldn't be like we would have to even send forces there if Donald Trump made that choice. He could just tell the troops we already have there to do something. But that would probably highlight an illegal order attacking an ally. Um, and I don't think Donald Trump cares. He doesn't care if it's a legal order or not. I mean, look at some of the stuff he was posting over on Truth Social. He posted a meme showing the United States, obviously with the U.S. flag, Canada with the U.S. flag over it, Greenland with the U.S. flag, and Venezuela. I don't know why he thinks that any of that is going to be allowed to happen, but that's where his mindset is at. So the prime minister of Greenland is saying, hey, be prepared. Now, we've been told that the Pentagon has told Donald Trump, we can't do that. No, sir, we cannot go into Greenland. Now we will see if he keeps it up, and he has refused to back off any sort of talk of using the military. He keeps at it, saying, "Well, we might have to do things the hard way." Now, for their part, our NATO allies are saying, "No, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're an ally. If you attack Greenland, we would be forced to come to Greenland's defense." And they have said they would. But see, they can take the United States down without firing a single shot. They can take a bazooka to the United States in regards to a lot of things and do way more damage economically than they ever could do militarily. Why? Well, for one thing, they could stop all trade to the UK, or not the UK, to Europe, to all of the NATO nations. They could just quit buying our shit. Okay, they quit buying shit from us. That grinds a big chunk of our exporting partnerships to a halt. We would have to refigure out how can we sell more to other countries and things like that. And that's not going to be easy when you are talking about 31 other countries that are all part of NATO suddenly saying, we're not buying anything from you again. Then you have the other side of it. They could also say, we're not selling you anything. And they could all pass embargoes saying, yeah, no goods out. Okay, a couple of big things you can think of: Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen. Can't get them anymore in the United States if they go this route. Done. And I know that's not the only thing that they produce. For example, Guinness and Heineken going with alcohol. Again, there are things that are produced in other countries besides here, and they could just say, "Yeah, we're not going to sell to you anymore." Could you imagine how bad that would affect the economy? That could grind a significant portion of the economy to a halt. Not being able to import things from Europe, for example, not being able to sell things to Europe. The stock market by itself yesterday, or yesterday as you're listening to this anyway, dropped 850 points. The Dow Jones did, in response to just the simple fact that European countries are talking about taking a bazooka to the United States and saying, yeah, we're just going to be done with you and not deal in trade. And if you think it wouldn't work, look at what has happened to places like Russia, where we put a whole bunch of sanctions on and basically nothing in, nothing out. And a lot of countries aren't doing trade with Russia. And we always hear about how bad their economy is and how expensive everything is for the everyday people. And you know who would hurt from that? Us. Now, Donald Trump, for his part, is talking about putting tariffs on all of the European countries, or at least 8 of them so far, but probably the rest of NATO as well, if they do not help him acquire Greenland. Well, we're still waiting on the Supreme Court to issue a ruling on his tariffs. Okay. But again, who pays those tariffs? We do. So he's throwing a temper tantrum, saying, "Well, I want Greenland. You're going to help me get it, and if not, I'm going to charge. I'm going to rig it so my people pay more for products." The tariffs hurt us in the end. It doesn't actually help the way he thinks it does. Beyond that, he was talking to the Prime Minister of Norway, and some messages got leaked out, and they were talking about Donald Trump, Greenland, and the Nobel Peace Prize. And he basically said, "You did not give me the Nobel Peace Prize, so I'm going to take Greenland. The time for thinking about peace is over," is what he said. This is who Donald Trump is. He is not somebody who deserves a peace prize, and he is thinking about just doing whatever he wants for himself. Now, I've seen some creators on TikTok suggest that maybe what the Nobel Committee should do is create the anti-peace prize, call it the Trumpy. And I know more than one creator has talked about that, or name it after Trump or something like that. And that would be hilarious. Kind of like what they did with the FIFA Peace Prize. Make it something. Just make up an award, give it to him. Oh, it's so prestigious. You're going to be the first person to ever have it. Nobody else has this but you. And that may feed his ego for a little bit. But that's the problem with narcissists. When they get to a point when they can't sustain it themselves anymore. He needs the adulation, he needs the praise, he needs the trophies, he needs these accomplishments to keep fueling himself. And because he's not getting them anymore, he's doing more and more desperate things to keep them going. Now, the other thing our NATO allies could do that would really cripple the United States economy is, and there are some of our allies are starting to do this. I think China, and I know China's not an ally, but they do hold a significant portion of our debt, and they're starting to sell off the debt. Now, if you sell it to somebody else who's going to hold on to it in the form of government bonds, that's one thing. But see, if they start cashing them in, we don't have the cash on hand to pay it all back, right? We owe like 20 some $1 trillion. And even when they were talking at the end of the year about the possibility of having to pay back the tariffs, I think it was Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said that there was like $700 billion in the Treasury top end, something like that, because that's what they had on hand or whatever. So that there's not even anywhere close to enough money. If they tried to pay out everything on all of these treasury notes, they would have to scramble to find somebody else to borrow from or to figure out how to pay it. And I don't know how they do it. It could cripple the United States just by calling in the debts. Now, talking about Scott Bessent, I'm pretty sure he was the one. Uh, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Scott Bessent. He was on one of the talk shows and he was talking about uh, you know, us being entitled and complaining that everything's too expensive. And he said, well, they could sell one of the 7 or 8 or 12 properties they own, and they would have some money to buy things again. He really thinks in this economy that people have more than one property. Why? Because that's what he does. That's what people like Trump do. The people around Trump that Trump is dealing with are all wealthy elites who own multiple properties. And that is what has always been their game plan. They own properties as investments. And well, oh, you have an investment here. Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and sell it off in this property and I'll make some money out of it and I'll fund my expenses that way because if I can't afford things. Most people have one property. And if you already have a house paid off and you still can't afford things, why would you end up selling it? Now, some people are going to do dumb things like taking out home equity loans or reverse mortgages or something like that, and borrow against the equity. But when you do that, you have to ultimately, if you do a reverse mortgage, you're basically selling the house just at a later date. And if you take out a HELOC, you still have to pay that money back. That doesn't solve the problem. but that's how these rich people think, right? That we all can do that. And if they start losing their houses, well, guess what? Now they have to go and move into some place to rent, and rent's more expensive than a mortgage. I talk with my coworkers about that all the time. Some of the ones that are still renting go, and they're telling me what they're paying, and they're paying more than my mortgage. I even worked with a guy not long ago who financed a vehicle, and his car payment was more than my mortgage. So going against the equity of your house is not going to necessarily be the solution, um, because uh, there's issues there. It's not going to solve the problem, but that's what they think. They think they've got it all figured out. They're just trying to spin and control things. Okay, going to do something I normally don't do, and I'm going to read part of an article here. We had something that happened that was breaking when we were on the live. I wanted to get to, and there's more updates on it. I was just reading here. When we were on the live with the Rational Boomer, the Air Force had turned around Air Force One. They were about an hour into Donald Trump's trip to Davos, Switzerland. Now, he was going there for this economic summit. And one of the things he was going to be going there for, he at least thought he was going to be able to make some progress on Greenland. Now, this says President Donald Trump once again on his way to Davos, Switzerland, aboard a backup plane after a technical issue forced Air Force One to return to Joint Base Andrews. Air Force One was in the air Tuesday evening when it turned around due to a minor electrical issue, according to the White House, which said the decision was made out of an abundance of caution. Plane landed safely in Maryland just after 11 p.m. Eastern, and Trump was wheels up in a new aircraft used as Air Force One roughly an hour later. After the original aircraft landed, staffers scrambled to transfer luggage between planes, while crews quickly moved boxes of fruit and wrapped sandwiches and beverages, according to reporters. Air Force One is the call sign of any aircraft of which the president is aboard. If you didn't know that, it doesn't matter what the plane is. If the president is on board, it is automatically tracked as Air Force One. Now, I was in a live right after I jumped in a live for like 20 minutes after I got off the Rational Boomer live. And they asked a question about that. It was a trivia question. And it said, when was the only time Air Force One went from being, or a plane went from being Air Force One to a commercial aircraft? And the answer to that was during Nixon. When Nixon resigned, while the plane was in the air, about halfway through, is when uh, Gerald Ford took the oath of office and became president. This is the second, continuing on here, second time in recent months Trump has been forced to turn to a backup aircraft. During a September visit to the UK, Trump and First Lady Melania Trump safely boarded a support helicopter after the one they were traveling with had a hydraulic issue. There are two new jets that are supposed to be delivered soon to be backups to Air Force One, or they're the new Air Force Ones, the new presidential planes. They are set to arrive mid 2028, originally scheduled for 2022, and they were delayed. So Donald Trump back on his way to Switzerland. Now, one of the things he is hoping to discuss at this conference, and by the time you hear this, he may already be at the conference. This may already be underway. One of the things he is hoping to discuss is Greenland and trying to get other countries and things to agree with him on acquiring Greenland. And I don't think it's going to work. Now, there was some speculation when he turned the plane around that he was chickening out, that he was going back to decide that he wasn't going to go to the conference. because he wasn't going to get his way. Well, clearly that wasn't the case. He's back on his way to Davos, Switzerland, but he's probably going to end up embarrassing us on the world stage. Donald Trump is a toddler. He is trying to get his way. It's not working, and he is going to, he doesn't care if he burns the world down in the process, as long as he gets what he wants. And what he wants right now is Greenland. Um, this whole situation is ridiculous. Uh, MAGA, I did a video, a TikTok on it earlier. There's a MAGA troll in one of my comment sections. When I was talking about him trying to acquire Greenland, and they said, well, he's just trolling the libs. Oh, he lives rent free in your head, something like that. They don't actually believe he is going to actually go through with any of his threats. He thinks this is just a lot of MAGA thinks this is some big uh, thing just to get us all riled up, right? And get us mad that he's even talking about it. And they think that's good foreign policy, that that's good leadership, that that makes a good president. Thing is, if a Democrat had acted the way that they have, that Donald Trump has at this point, they would be up in arms. Most of the things that we are seeing happen are things they've accused Kamala Harris of wanting to do during the last election. The things that are going on with Donald Trump and his health, where he rambles for 2 hours talking about nothing and looks old and senile. And we talk about how he's looking old and senile and frail. And they say, oh, you mean Biden, don't you? No, we're talking about Donald Trump, but they don't see it. They see it in short clips in their news feed because Fox News is carefully cherry picking parts of it to show and cutting away when he starts to ramble. They'll cut away from the feed and do a voiceover. Well, Donald Trump talking about this at the White House today, and then they would, they might be on a slight delay so they can hear what he's talking about. Oh, he sounds more coherent. Okay, let's go back to him. They don't say that out loud, but that's what's going on behind the scenes. These MAGAs and these Republicans, I don't know how we get through to them. But we have to make it a point to where they go back under their rocks, make it to where it is not just socially okay for them to have a difference of opinion. We need to have it be more like how people who wore the white pointy hoods reacted after the civil rights movement, and where it goes back in their closet, and they at least don't talk about it. And I think that's what's going to happen when Donald Trump is finally gone. There's going to be an absolute dog pile on Donald Trump. And even those, they may come out publicly and say, yeah, I never really liked the guy that much anyway, even if they were some of his ardent supporters, just because it won't be the cool thing to do in their social circle to support Donald Trump. Now, one of the last things I wanted to talk about was TikTok itself. Now, Mike and I did a live last night, The Rational Boomer. If you want to check that out today over on the Rational Boomer podcast on here on YouTube or Spotify, go ahead. You'll get my commentary along with a bunch of other people's opinions. It was a great show. But here in the next couple of days, they are supposed to be changing servers for TikTok. And apparently they are going to be moving where some of the algorithm is held and how some of this works. And TikTok may not be the same, and TikTok may not come out of it. Okay. So, what am I going to do if there's an issue? Well, if there's a problem and TikTok kicks me out, I will probably keep posting my content up on YouTube. I will just use that as my first source. I will have to reset up all my automation because the way it's set right now is when I post a TikTok, once it goes live, it gets taken down, put up on YouTube, put up on Blue Sky. Most of them do. I've had a couple that didn't, only because they were a couple seconds too long. But for the most part, they go up over on Blue Sky as well. And then I get the audio so I can put it up on Spotify. And I'll just have to redo some of that. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to keep making content, keep focusing here on making the podcast and coming out with content for everybody, giving you my takes on things as it's going on, as I look into the world of news and politics and try to give you an explanation maybe into why they are doing certain things or trying to calm fears, because we get people all worked up about things that could happen or might happen, and it sounds scary. But sometimes it's just getting worked up over something that can't even happen or shouldn't even be allowed to happen. So if TikTok goes away or if something with this new algorithm screws everything up, I'm still going to be around. Um, I don't plan on going anywhere in the long run. It's just going to be me, uh, maybe having to move where I primarily host my stuff. And who knows? Maybe I'll get left alone. For the most part, I haven't been dinged too bad by TikTok for anything. I've only had one violation, and that was when I accidentally double posted the exact same video, and they gave me a violation for that. Other than that, they've never hit me with a permanent violation for any of my content. I have always won on appeal, and as far as I know, I haven't gotten any live violations or live restrictions that have led me to not be able to go live. Speaking of lives, I may do another one in the next couple of days as the next podcast. Um, just because it's good to get people's opinions. And sometimes it's just easier to figure out what people want to hear about. I don't always know which stories you guys want to hear my take on. And that's a good way to figure out what people want to talk about. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I will be back again tomorrow with even more to talk about, because there's always stuff to talk about with this administration. And we'll see what comes up with Donald Trump being in Switzerland and what kind of outcome uh, that meeting in Davos, Switzerland has. So I hope you have a great day, and we will talk again tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.